Now, returning to stress in sentences, our original sentence, Anne hates cold, wet snow, is made up of a series of monosyllabic feet. Right? Each syllable forms a one-syllable foot. And we already saw in a previous lecture an example where we have sequences of bisyllabic feet. Sunday evening concerts often feature famous artists. And the point of these examples is to show how the rhythm of English speech is different depending on the kind of feet. In the first sentence, they're all monosyllabic feet. In the second sentence, they're all bisyllabic feet. The timing is roughly equal for each foot. Anne hates cold, wet snow. Sunday evening concerts often feature famous artists. So the sound of the speech sounds a little faster in a bisyllabic foot than a monosyllabic foot. Or in reverse, a monosyllabic foot feels a little stretched out or slower than a bisyllabic foot. We also saw that we can have this pre-foot syllable which creates a different kind of rhythm pattern. So when the pre-foot syllable pattern appears in a word or a phrase, we get examples like Japan, which resembles today, which we've already seen. Has had. Right? Has had is a kind of verb, an auxiliary verb followed by a main verb. To grow, right, is an infinitive verb with the to preposition. A lot. So is an article that is adjoined to the noun lot. Right? You get a lot. Of corn. To feed. It's cows. Right? These are pre-foot syllable patterns. When these phrases are combined together in a sentence, however, we don't pronounce them as separate, independent feet. We group them into phrases and a sentence, and that results in a slightly different organization of the syllables into feet. And in fact, what we pronounce is more like Japan has, where the pan has becomes a foot. Had to. Grow a lot of corn to feed its cows. The natural rhythm for the whole sentence, Japan has had to grow a lot of corn to feed its cows, is the result of grouping these syllables in such a way that the primary stress falls on the first syllable in each of the feet. Unstressed syllables are then kind of following the primary syllable, the primary stress syllable. Okay. Japan has had to grow a lot of corn to feed its cows. Now let's back up and talk about rhythm and then add one more detail and then kind of go a little further. So we've seen that the basis of English rhythm is the foot. We've already seen that it must include at least 2 rhyme segments, whether they're in the same syllable or different syllables. We've also seen that a foot may include 3 rhyme segments if the first syllable is a heavy syllable and the second syllable is a light syllable. But we can't, we don't get 3 rhyme segments where the first syllable is light and the second syllable is heavy. Okay? All of that is familiar. Now I want to introduce the terms strong and weak because the foot structure of English is a strong-weak pattern. The rhythms of languages fall into these 2 types, strong-weak rhythm types, or really strong-weak foot types, or weak-strong foot types. And there are other languages that are weak-strong foot type languages. English is a strong-weak foot type language. And as a result, for any foot with more than 1 syllable, the first syllable is strong, the second syllable is weak, never the reverse. Okay? And that's the point I want to connect with heavy and light. And there's always some confusion between strong and weak heavy and light. They do relate to one another, but they are not the same thing. Now, a strong syllable in a foot in English is stressed, and a weak syllable is unstressed. Okay? Now, in addition to that property of the foot, there's a property of syllable weight, which is that a heavy syllable must be strong. Okay? It can't be in a weak position. So in a word that has more than one foot, you can either have a strong foot and a weak foot. At the word level, the order is not restricted. Okay? So here I have a word made up of 2 feet. And in this particular case, each foot is a monosyllabic foot. In a word like digest, there are 2 stresses. The first stressed syllable is primary stress, and the second stressed syllable has secondary stress. Because they're stressed, neither syllable has vowel reduction. There's no pronunciation of schwa, but the pitch of the first syllable, because it's primary stress, is higher than the pitch of the second syllable, digest. And we recognize that as the strong foot in the word. Now, there's also a related verb, digest. And in digest, we have the opposite pattern of feet within the word. Each of them is still a monosyllabic foot. This time, the second foot is the strong foot in the word, and the first foot is the weak foot in the word. And therefore, the pronunciation is digest. Still, each has stress. Therefore, neither of them undergoes vowel reduction. There's no pronunciation of schwa, but the placement of the higher pitch on primary stress, in this case, lands on the second syllable. Okay? So, at the level of the feet, you can either be strong followed by strong followed by weak, like digest, or weak followed by strong, as in digest. But within the foot, the syllable pattern will always be strong syllable followed by weak syllable. This is an important distinction, that we have strong syllable and weak syllable within the foot. We have strong foot and weak foot within the word. It's only within the foot, inside the foot, that we have this restriction on the order of strong and weak units. So when we look at word stress, and here again I'm talking about nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, this requirement does not apply to small grammatical elements. But a word in English must have at least one foot. Again, whether the foot has 2 rhyme segments in the same syllable or different syllables, either way it satisfies this requirement. So a monosyllabic word in English will always have a heavy syllable. Right? So in a word like, let's say, boy, see, right? Head, back, the first 2 words have a branching nucleus, either a diphthong, like boy, or a long vowel, like see, or they have a nucleus coda in a branching rhyme, right? Like head and back. Right? Now, if I were to try to create a word out of a light syllable, something like boy without the e, boy, or sit, or het, or bat, these are impossible words in English, because English words must have at least one foot, and each foot must have at least 2 rhyme segments. But these examples all have 1 rhyme segment. So here's where we have this notion of word minimality. The minimum size of a word in English is a single heavy syllable. really a single foot. Japanese is an example of a language that permits smaller words. So you can have a word like e or, ha. But in English, that would be impossible. Now, although a word must have at least 1 foot, a word may have more than 1 foot. And this was another source of confusion. I received some questions this week, so let's make sure that we look at some examples of words with more than 1 foot. When a word has more than 1 foot, they are not all equal. We saw earlier with digest and digest, one of them can be a strong foot and one of them can be a weak foot. Well, one of them will be pronounced with primary stress, and we use this little kind of rising accent mark to indicate primary stress, and others get pronounced with secondary stress, a slightly lower pitch, and those get marked with a falling accent mark. And as a result, one of these feet is pronounced more strongly than the other. The one with primary stress has additional sound energy. Now we could have 2 bisyllabic feet in which the first foot is the strong foot and the second foot is the weak foot. So this little red S you see after the first foot indicates it's the strong foot. And the red W after the second foot indicates it's the weak foot. But inside each foot, the first syllable is always the strong syllable, and the second syllable is the weak syllable. And you can see the accent marks. The primary stress falls on the strong syllable in the strong foot. Secondary stress falls on the strong syllable in the weak foot. Now we also have words where 2 feet form a word, and the first foot is a weak foot, and the second foot is a strong foot. Still, within the foot, the first syllable is strong and the second syllable is weak. But at the level of the word, the first foot in this case now has secondary stress, and the second foot has primary stress. But because stress is on the strong syllable in the foot, it's going to be pronounced on the first syllable of the first foot and the first syllable of the second foot, which is the first and third syllables of a 4-syllable word. Now, sometimes a foot is bisyllabic, sometimes a foot is monosyllabic. So we can also form words in which a bisyllabic foot followed by a monosyllabic foot can be strong, weak. Right? The bisyllabic foot is strong, the following monosyllabic foot is weak. But it doesn't have to be that way. Right? The monosyllabic foot could be strong, and the preceding bisyllabic foot could be weak. But again, within the foot, the first syllable is a strong syllable, and it receives stress. But on the left, you see the bisyllabic foot is the strong foot, so primary stress falls on the strong syllable in the strong foot. Secondary stress falls on the only syllable in the weak foot. On the right side, you see that the secondary stress falls on the first syllable because it's the strong syllable of the weak foot, and primary stress falls on the only syllable in the strong monosyllabic foot. And finally, we can have a word made up of 2 monosyllabic feet, and it can either be a strong foot followed by a weak foot, or a weak foot followed by a strong foot. Primary stress is pronounced on the strong syllable in the strong foot. If the foot has only 1 syllable, then that's the syllable that gets stress. Secondary stress is pronounced on the strong syllable in a weak foot. And again, if it only has 1 syllable, that's the syllable that receives the stress. So all of these are possible patterns. So let's look at a few examples. In fact, this goes back to the very first lecture where I just described different patterns. And now we can understand that the patterns result from how the syllables are grouped into feet. So first we see two-syllable words made up of bisyllabic feet. Right? So each word is 1 foot. It's a bisyllabic foot. The first syllable is the strong syllable and therefore has stress. The weak syllable, the second syllable, is unstressed and therefore it doesn't have stress. And so words like pity, happy, butter, yellow, meadow are made up of two light syllables. The first syllable is strong, so it gets stress. The next column, 40, candy, hunter, party, window. These are bisyllabic feet made up of a heavy syllable followed by a light syllable. And again, the first syllable is stressed because it's the strong syllable in the foot. Now, heavy syllables must be stressed, and heavy syllables can therefore only appear in the strong position of a foot, which is why we never have a foot light followed by heavy, because that would force the heavy syllable to appear in the weak position of a bisyllabic foot. But that's not possible. Right? That's prohibited. Right? That's not allowed. Okay. Other two-syllable words could be made up of two monosyllabic feet, where each syllable is a foot by itself. Now, sometimes the first monosyllabic foot is the strong foot in the word, and the second foot is the weak foot. Words like syntax, textile, digest, escort, rabbi. None of them has vowel reduction because none of them is unstressed, but in each word the first syllable gets primary stress and is therefore pronounced with higher pitch. In some cases, we have two-syllable words made up of two monosyllabic feet in which the second foot is the strong foot and the first foot is the weak foot. This is actually not a typical pattern for the English phonology, for English rhythm. These words either come from other languages and we've kept something about their original pronunciation, or sometimes they might involve combining word parts together. But in the examples you see here, these are words that have come into English from other languages. So bamboo, hotel, ballet, digest, these are two-syllable words made up of two monosyllabic feet in which the first foot is the weak foot and the second foot is the strong foot. Now I will mention the word ballet is pronounced this way in North America. In British English, they tend to pronounce that word as a bisyllabic foot, and therefore it would sound more like pity. They would say ballet, ballet. But I've included it in this list since in my dialect, hotel and ballet and bamboo have the same pattern. Now, the final pattern is the pre-foot syllable. Words like canal, degree, balloon, lament, July. In every case, there's only one syllable in a foot, so there's only one stress. The pre-foot syllable is not in a foot, and it must therefore be unstressed, and the vowel will always be reduced to schwa. Now, when we looked at these two-syllable words at the beginning of the course, we also looked at 3- and 4-syllable words. So we'll quickly review those. We had words made up of 3 syllables, which we now understand to be a bisyllabic foot, followed by a post-foot syllable. Words like Canada, cinema, citizen, pelican. Also, 3-syllable words made up of a bisyllabic foot followed by a monosyllabic foot, in which the first foot, which happens to be bisyllabic, but the first foot is strong and the second foot is weak. Words like chamomile, chromosome, nightingale, architect. The second syllable is a weak syllable in a foot, so it's unstressed, and therefore is pronounced with vowel reduction, with schwa. The first and third syllables, however, are both stressed, the first with primary stress, and the third with secondary stress. But now we can see why, because of how they're grouped into the feet. Now, it could be that the bisyllabic foot is strong and the following monosyllabic foot is weak, but the reverse is also possible. Again, these are either words borrowed into English or words built out of smaller parts. So you have a bisyllabic foot. Inside the foot, the first syllable is strong, the second syllable is weak, followed by a monosyllabic foot. The monosyllabic foot has to be heavy, right? Because it's a foot. There must be two segments in the rhyme. In this case, however, it's the monosyllabic foot that is the strong foot, receiving primary stress. So you get kangaroo, engineer, lemonade, understand. So the pitch rises onto the primary stress that you see in the final syllable in these words. And then the final variation was to have a pre-foot syllable before a bisyllabic foot. Right? These were the words we saw at the beginning of today's lecture: aroma, tomato, vanilla, banana. Stress is on the second syllable because it's the first syllable of the foot. And then finally, four-syllable words. In these cases, they're made up of 2 feet, 2 bisyllabic feet. In a word like introduction, introduction. The second foot is the strong foot, and the first foot is the weak foot. Inside each foot, the first syllable is the strong syllable, so stress is placed on the first and the third syllables of the word introduction. Primary stress is on the third syllable because it's the strong syllable in the strong foot. But we also have words like architecture. Whoops, I went too fast there. We also have words like architecture, also made up of 2 bisyllabic feet, but this time primary stress is on the first syllable because it's the strong syllable in the strong foot, which is now the first foot. The third syllable still has stress because it's the strong syllable of the foot, but it's the strong syllable of the weak foot, so it gets secondary stress. Architecture, introduction, architecture. Now we'll learn later why, what the difference is. Today we're just describing them, and we can see the representations are different. But there is a reason why we arrive at one pattern with a word like introduction and another pattern with architecture. And we'll come to those details later in the course. The third variation that I showed briefly has both a pre-foot and a post-foot syllable. So there's only one foot in this 4-syllable word, and it's made up of the second and third syllables. They're both light syllables, but because the first syllable is the strong syllable in the foot, the first syllable in the foot, right? It's the second syllable of the word, but the first syllable of the foot is the strong syllable in the foot, so it is the stressed syllable. Divinity, divinity. The d of the first syllable is pronounced with schwa. The n of the third syllable is pronounced with schwa, divinity. Again, the final e is not reduced to schwa because of a word final lengthening effect, but we'll come back to that later in the course. Okay, that's word stress. Let me stop here then, and we'll pick up the next topic in the next video.